All right, if you have your Bibles, you can turn with me to Matthew chapter 5. We're going to continue on in our sermon series, the Sermon on the Mount today. We have learned that the Sermon on the Mount is one of the apex teachings of Jesus Christ. It's the very foundational point for his gospel. And this is instructions for us as disciples and followers of Jesus how to live and interact in the world. The Sermon on the Mount is countercultural. It's in your face, and it forces you to make some very hard decisions about your life and how you're going to live according to that gospel, and we thank God for it because it's challenging. It pushes us to be better people. That's the whole point of being a follower of Jesus, not staying stagnant. Could you imagine if the apostles who wanted to follow Jesus said, Jesus, we'll be your disciples, but just don't make us go anywhere, don't make us do anything, don't make us talk to anybody, and we'll be good. Jesus would have looked at them and said, I could find some better people. So it pushes us. It challenges us to get out of our comfort zone, to live counterculturally, and sometimes standing for God means standing alone. Can you agree with that? We don't like standing alone. Many of us have that mentality that we'll just follow the crowd, we'll just blend in, we won't stick out, we won't make any difference, we won't raise any ruckus, we won't rock the boat, we'll just be people. But we can't be people because we're Christians. And this isn't our home, we're pilgrims passing through. This world isn't what matters to us, it's the next that matters. And so that's where we place our significance. Our focal point this morning is God's law is perfect and is a wonderful tool to help us love the Lord with all of our heart, all of our soul, and all of our mind. However, humanity's interpretation of the law is not perfect and often leads to destruction. God intended us to take his law seriously by the spirit of it, but not the letter. When we rigidly interpret it and apply it, we become like the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the scribes. We all know the famous story in the book of Exodus about Moses coming down from the mountain, holding the Ten Commandments, and that was God's law for his people. Now, when we talk about the law according to the Gospel of Matthew, we need to understand what the law exactly is. We know about the Ten Commandments. That's moral law. That's the law that applies to all of humanity. That's the law that's written on our heart. That's the law that's inscribed into our conscience. And so when you're a kid and you go into the cookie jar, your mama tells you don't take a cookie, and you take a cookie, you immediately feel that sense of remorse and guilt. Should I have done that? But the cookie tastes so good, I'll live with the consequences. That's moral law. You know it's wrong because it's written on your heart. And when your conscience screams at you when you do something wrong or incorrectly, that's God saying, you have violated my law. That's why you look at across all of civilization. I think it's 1,200 people groups and cultures in the entire world. All of them have a sense of this moral law. Don't rape. Don't murder. Don't steal. Respect your elders. That's God's moral law, and that's something that's intuitive to all of us. It doesn't take you being a Christian to know God's moral law because it's written on your heart. Now, for the Jews, there are the ceremonial law, which applies to how you interact with God in his temple. That's Jewish ceremonial law. And then you have civil law, the laws that govern the land. Should you free slaves after 7 years? Yes, that's a Jewish civil law. Should we celebrate the year of Jubilee? Yes, that's a Jewish civil law. And so you have the moral law, the ceremonial law, and the civil law. And we know the 10 Commandments, those are 10 laws. But throughout the course of history, the Jews kept adding laws and restrictions and regulations. So now that there are over 640 some odd laws that you must follow in order to call yourself one of the promised ones, a Jewish child of God. So this is Jesus' environment in which he is living. Not only is there the moral law that every man is required to obey, but now there are 600 and some odd more laws that you're required to follow. And most of those laws were given by men for men. They weren't God's law. They were just laws that men made up to control other people. So let's look at Matthew chapter 5 today. We'll look at verses 17 through 20. And Jesus says this, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. I tell you the truth, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Anyone who breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven." Let's remember for a minute just exactly who Jesus is talking to. We know that a great crowd, a multitude of people were following Jesus. This is explained to us at the end of chapter 4 of Matthew. Because Jesus was a wonder maker, he was a miracle maker, he was healing people's diseases, setting people free from spiritual bondage and demon possession. He was quite the popular guy, and crowds of people were following him around, seeking his hand but not his heart, wanting to be around a man who had such charisma and dynamism and all of this stuff for the things that they could get from Jesus. So a great crowd of people were following him. We know that the great crowd of people that were following Jesus in Matthew chapter 4 and Matthew chapter 26 were the ones that were taking up arms to kill him, to crucify him. And so we know that they weren't following Jesus for the right motives, just for what they could get from Jesus. And here we have 12 apostles of Jesus, common men, fishermen, craftsmen, tradesmen. They were the least among them in their society, and they were following Jesus. And because they were following Jesus, they were getting some of the popular attention too. And Jesus gathers them together and says, before he taught the multitude of people, he gathered his disciples and said, "Let me tell you some things about how you need to operate in the world so that you are different." And then Jesus gives them the Beatitudes. And he juxtaposes a negative proposition with a positive outcome or a blessing. He says, when you're poor in spirit, you get the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are the righteous. And then he just juxtaposes that with a blessing that you receive when you participate in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so now we have Jesus telling his disciples that their righteousness must exceed that of the Pharisees if they want to enter the kingdom of heaven. And this is an interesting proposition that Jesus gives his disciples. How can we be any more righteous than the Pharisees, the people who guard the law, they teach the law, they protect the law, they live the law, and Jesus is going to show them that they're not living the law according to God's plan for humanity. They've got it all wrong. And Jesus says, I didn't come to abolish the law. That's one thing that you need to understand, because that was a common Jewish misconception. When the Messiah comes to earth, he'll establish a kingdom. All of the previous law will be wiped away, and now we'll live under the law of the Messiah. Jesus says, I didn't come to abolish the law because the law is perfect. I gave you the law for a reason. I gave you the law so that you could live in accordance with my plan for humanity, but you have screwed it up. That's one thing that humans do well. We take something perfect and we break it. That's like just this past week, you see we've installed the new microphone system. Did anybody notice a difference? I did, because I was able to control individual channels. Anyway, I was setting up the new microphone system, and Ezra comes, takes a perfectly brand new microphone system, grabs one of the microphones, and immediately I said, "Put it down." Because you will take a perfectly brand new microphone, drop it on the top, ruin the Cartoid inside of it, and now this expensive microphone becomes garbage. That's how humanity operates. We take perfectly good, brand new things in their shiny packages and we ruin them. I haven't seen anybody keep anything in pristine condition in my entire life, no matter what it is. Whether it's a classic car or a cell phone or a piece of antique furniture, they always end up nicking it, scratching it, scraping it, getting rust on it, because we're perfect at ruining things. And here we have God's perfect law, the 10 Commandments, and then we start adding things onto them. Well, we don't like how so-and-so does X, so let's make a law to ban that. And God is up in heaven just shaking his head. There goes my people, ruining his perfect thing again. And we're good at it. We've made a profession out of it. We like telling other people how to live and what to do. That's why Jesus says, be careful that you take the plank out of your own eye before you take the speck out of your neighbor's. Because we do that, we do a really good job of that. So one of the things that we know that the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes, or the teachers of the law, did is that they didn't apply the law the way that God wanted them to and internalize it and make it about themselves. They externalized God's law and made it a way to control other people. They lived according to the letter of the law and not the spirit of the law. They had all these regulations to try to control people to live the way that they wanted them to live and not the way that God had intended them to live. And so Jesus comes on the scene and he says, no, you have very low expectations of my law. You're missing the point. And next week we'll talk about all of the things that Jesus did to fulfill the law, but I'll give you kind of an insider's look into next week's sermon. And we'll say this, that when Jesus comes on the scene, he tells his followers that you have heard from long ago that it was said that if you murder your neighbor or your brother, you've committed a sin. And Jesus said, nah, it's not enough that you don't murder somebody. Everybody does that. But if you hate your brother in your heart, you've already committed murder. You see, we have very low expectations for the law of God. Jesus says, nah, I don't want you to live according to the letter. I want you to live according to the Spirit. So the law in Jerusalem is you can't covet your neighbor's wife and commit adultery with her. Jesus says it's not enough that you don't commit adultery. The pagans do that. If you look at a woman with lust in your heart, you've already committed adultery with her. You see, that's the law of Jesus, not the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law. You see, we do a really good job of taking things according to the letter of the law. When my wife was growing up, she grew up in a very conservative church. Not to say that I'm not conservative, but this was like next level. You had to wear certain length skirts. Women weren't allowed to wear pants. You couldn't wear chapstick on your lips because that was considered a sin. And she grew up in this rigid environment, and the Spirit wasn't in the church, it was dead. Because there were so many rules and so many regulations. You could only sing a certain set list of songs. You couldn't sing anything outside of the box. Don't get away from hymn page number 456. That's our song. You see, we do a really good job living according to the letter of the law and using that as a means to control other people's relationship with God. When Jesus came on the scene, he says, you're doing it completely backwards. I don't want you to live according to the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law, because when you live that way, you receive freedom. You see, a lot of people see the law as a vice, when actually it's a virtue. I can't live according to the law because it's too hard, it's too difficult, it's too structured, it's too constraining. Why would I want to put myself in this box? And when you live according to the letter of the law, that's what happens. When you live according to the spirit of the law, your life is free and liberated, and you're able to operate in peace and hope and joy and love because it's a gift from God. So we don't live according to the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law. The ceremonial law related specifically to Israel's worship. Its primary purpose was to point forward to Jesus Christ. These laws were no longer necessary after Jesus' death and resurrection. While we are no longer bound by ceremonial law, the principles behind them remain. Can you agree with that this morning? There's a certain sect of Christianity that believes that you can only do church a certain way, and if you do church differently, you're committing sacrilege. But the thing that we must remember as followers of Jesus Christ is that the methods change, but the message never does. And with the advent of radio and TV and the internet, we are able to reach millions more people than if we were just to have church services on Sunday morning. You see, the methods change, but the message never does. We still preach Christ crucified, but we do it over the airwaves. We do it over the internet. We do it over television because the technology is available to us. In the days of Bill McChesney and other very famous missionaries, it was brutal for them to go to foreign lands. They had to spend months and months working out the governmental paperwork, going behind the red tape, trying to do things according to the law so that they can go into foreign countries. And now you don't have to. People could just open their laptop, plug immediately into a church service. Just like our church, we have very many people that watch our YouTube videos and they consider our church their church even though they don't live here. They send tithes here, they send offerings here, and they watch our services on YouTube, and we're their church. But they don't live here, they don't come here, they don't participate. But they're still able to be a part of us and our ministry because of it. The methods change, the message never does. And when we tell people you could only do church this way, we're living according to the letter of the law and not the spirit. And it's such a killing and a quashing of the spirit and the movement of God. Could you imagine if back in the days of Jesus and his apostles, people would have told him, you're not allowed to leave Jerusalem. You have to stay in Jerusalem. You can't go outside. You can't go to Samaria. You can't go to Galatia. You can't go to Sicily. You can't go to Rome. Can't go to Greece. Can't go to Spain. You got to stay in Jerusalem. What would have happened? The religion of Christianity would have imploded upon itself because Jerusalem was completely destroyed by the Romans in AD 76. Not a stone was left unturned. And the diaspora of the Jews happened. They lost their country. Christianity had to go into the world because that was the mission of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So we don't live according to the spirit, to the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law. And here we have Jesus telling his disciples, you can't be like the Pharisees. You have to be better than the Pharisees. Some of those in the crowd were experts at telling others what to do, just like the Pharisees were. Make sure you don't do anything on the Sabbath. You'll be violating God's law. And what did Jesus do? He healed sick people on the Sabbath and raised them from the dead. Because the gospel of Jesus Christ was more important than the restrictions that the Pharisees had put on the letter of the law. There were people who desperately needed the touch of Jesus on Sabbath day, and he gave it to them. Jesus, you're not supposed to be doing that on Sabbath day. What are you doing? You're a blasphemer. You're a heretic. Why are you touching the heart of people on the Sabbath day? It's wrong. You can't be doing that. And Jesus said, my law is important, but my mission is more important. And that's what we must come to realize, is that sometimes we go into dirty, dark places to touch the hearts of people for Jesus Christ. But Pastor Don, you can't preach outside of the church. That's crazy. You can't go to the festivals and the parks and the beer gardens and the bars. You can't do that. And I don't drink. Trust me, I don't. But sometimes there's somebody in a dirty, dark place that needs to hear the gospel of Jesus Christ and be touched by him in those places. Those people won't come to church, so we take the gospel to them. That's why Jesus said, go into all the world. He didn't say just go to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. He didn't say go to the holy places, Mount Carmel and Samaria. He said, go into all the world, and that means dirty, dark places. And we learned last week that we are the salt of the earth and the light of the world, and we take our light and we put it on a lampstand and we illuminate the darkness. That means going places that other people won't go. One of my favorite stories of all time is about a Catholic missionary named Father Damien of Malachi. I've shared this story with you before. But here was a man who saw a leopard colony outcast people from the government of the United States, saying, you can no longer live in society. We're going to banish you to a secluded island so that you could live out your days and die. No food, no water, no electricity, no common amenities. You're going to go and you're going to live on this island until you die. Nobody's going to care about you. We're going to forget about you, out of sight, out of mind. You could still go to Malachi today and see Father Damien's mission. Father Damien heard about the plight of these people suffering from leprosy, and he said, I can't let them live this way. And against all advice and against all counsel from his friends and peers, he went to Malachi and established a mission there and lived with the leper people. And he contracted leprosy too, but he died alongside the people he loved. That's the gospel. That's the heart of Jesus, going into dirty, dark places and pouring your life into other people, because that's what Jesus commanded you to do. But when we live according to the letter of the law, we don't go to Malachi. We don't go to the heart of darkness in the Congo of Africa. We don't go to India among all the AIDS communities. But when we live according to the spirit of the law, which is the gospel of Jesus, we go to places no one else goes, and we let our light shine. You are the salt of the earth, the light of the world. Nobody lights their candle and hides it under a basket. No, they put it on a lampstand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. There are some dark corners in your world that need to see the light. Are you willing to go? You might have to think outside of the box. You might have to learn some different praise and worship songs. You might have to learn how to do church differently, and it's okay. The methods change, the message never does. We preach Christ crucified, which is the power of God for salvation. Are there people in your life that need to hear that message? Are there people in your life that need a little bit of light of the gospel of Jesus Christ? Our final thought this morning is people have a tremendous habit of taking God's wonderful gifts and ruining them beyond all recognition. That is exactly what happened to God's law. Finite human beings interpreted it, twisted it for their own gain, and used it as a means of controlling other people. Jesus came on the scene and set the record straight. He showed us that the law isn't sufficient to save us or even make us good people for that matter. We have to follow the spirit of the law and not the letter. It is determined by the position of our hearts in the act. Distortion of the law makes it easy for people to become experts in telling other people what to do and how to be. But those same people can often miss the point of the law themselves. That's the Pharisees. Obeying God's law as an act of the will is more important than your ability to demand others to follow it. It is easier to study God's law than it is to live it out in your own life. We could become like the Pharisees, whose entire identity was wrapped up in their ability to recite the law and completely miss the point. Let your righteousness exceed that of the Pharisees. That's your challenge this morning. Let your righteousness exceed that of the Pharisees. You see, the Pharisees thought that they were righteous people. They did everything right. They lived according to the law. They observed the Jewish feast days. They participated in Sabbath at the synagogue. They did everything according to the law, and they still missed the gift of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Don't harden your heart so much to think that there isn't something you could learn from somebody else. Don't harden your hearts to think that the only way that you can get close to God is by singing hymn songs, or by reciting the Nicene Creed or the Apostles' Creed, or doing genuflections at the altar. There are ways to worship God in your own way. Pastor John, why are you saying that? You're actually saying that from the pulpit? Yes, I am. My pulpit isn't any more special than any other pastor's. What makes my pulpit powerful is that I faithfully communicate the gospel of Jesus Christ to you, and I'm willing to be a vessel. That's what makes this pulpit powerful. And I'll never be so conceited as to believe that only I can reach lost souls. You see, there are people that I can reach that you can't, but there are people that you can reach that I can't. And when we work together as a team according to the spirit of the law, we win hearts for Jesus.